guys, my name's Samira and welcome back to my channel. First of all, Happy New Year to everyone. Hopefully 2022 will bring us all good vibes, good health, and overall just good things this new year. Sorry it's been a while since I've uploaded. I recently started grad school last fall, so literally no time between that and work to do anything, so I apologize for the lack of updates. I will say, despite that, 2021 was my most successful reading year thus far by hitting 100 books. Never thought that would happen in my life, yet here we are. I figured I'd just sit down and talk about my top 10 books of last year. I found some new auto-buy authors, new series I enjoyed, new books I never thought I'd get to, yet I did and I ended up enjoying it. Some surprises as well, so I hope you're just as excited as I am. So sit down, chill out with me as we hash out my top 10 books of last year. We're just gonna go roughly based on when I read them, based on my recollection of last year. It's a very chill video, so there's really no ranking, no rhyme or reason to this video other than everything sparks joy. That's all we should worry about, honestly. Some of these you may know of, some of these you may not. First one I'm going to talk about is, I think, the most memorable book of last year, which if you watch my vlog on this, you know exactly how I feel about this book. But of course, the first one is Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare, one of my most anticipated books of last year. I think we all know, if you don't already know, if you're new here, I adore the Last Hours trilogy for obvious reasons. Cordelia is half Persian like I am. That alone, having that type of representation for myself in such a mainstream fantasy series is already life-changing and just overall very exciting for me. So that in itself was why I adore that book so much in that series. But also the characters are so well done. Like, I still to this day stand by my point of saying that The Last Hours is definitely Cassandra Clare's best work yet. She's already known for creating such well-loved characters. I personally feel as though like these are probably my favorite Cassandra Clare gang of friends, because not only is their platonic love already established because they consider themselves family, whether it is through blood or through bond, they're just a whole tight-knit family, which I adore in any sort of friend group, even if it's platonic love but also romantic love as well. Obviously, if you haven't read that series, I will not spoil for you, but I highly recommend that you do check it out. If you're new to the Shadowhunters series, you do not necessarily need to read the other books. You can definitely just skip ahead and read Chain of Iron and Chain of Gold as well. If you have not read it yet, I highly recommend. Obviously, every book I'm going to talk about in this video, I'm going to highly recommend. I remember I was very distraught about the ending of Chain of Iron. Again, I won't say why, but I was really excited to hopefully be reading Chain of Thorns in like, what, 2 months as of now? Which clearly that's not happening. We're getting it in November, which I'm very distraught about. But we're prolonging the series as much as possible because I know I will miss them dearly when the series ends, so in a way that's kind of good for me that I don't have to go without them for very long. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Again, it was just a very pleasurable and enjoyable experience for me. I got to read it with one of my dear friends and yeah, just bond over it and just have an overall good time despite me having a mental breakdown at the end of reading that book. But yes, definitely recommend, and obviously I loved it. Next one I'm going to talk about is People We Meet on Vacation. Emily Henry has quickly become a auto-buy author for me coming out of 2021 and getting into 2022. I only read People We Meet on Vacation by her last year, and that was my first book I ever read by her, and that was during a time where I was very much in a book slump. I didn't really vibe with the books I was reading at the time. I was just struggling overall to get through a book and find a book that I thoroughly enjoyed, because I feel as though I was in a drought ever since finishing Chain of Iron, so I just needed something happy to read. People We Meet on Vacation came at such a perfect time for me. Right book at the right time, and it was obviously set on vacation. That was during summer break for me, so overall the setting was ideal, the vibes were ideal, everything. Last year I just had an overall struggle with getting through physical books. That was one of the only books that I got through physically, and could not put down. That rarely happens to me, especially with a physical book, because I find that with physical books, I just don't have the attention span nowadays to just sit down and read a bunch at once. But People We Meet on Vacation, there's something in there. There's crack. There's something in the way Emily Henry writes that's so addicting. Also, what was very intriguing for me as well is that I tend to not care for the friends to lovers trope. I just find as though it's very overdone, but also it tends to be with the guy like not realizing the girl exists until they get older, and he's like, oh my gosh, now I'm gonna give you all my time and attention and love. Like, where was that energy, my guy, when you were friends? Yeah, that's just my general outlook in regards to the friends to lovers trope. But this book made me realize why I liked the friends to lovers trope, because again, that's the main trope in People We Meet on Vacation. I could not understand why I loved it so much, yet it has a trope that I don't care for, and I finally cracked the code. And it's because as long as they have the platonic love already established and then it goes into romantic love, I feel as though I'm more invested, and there's like more foundation and groundwork there and more history as well. It's not, again, like doing a complete 180 that finally they develop feelings for each other. But yeah, they very much have platonic love already established between the two, and it just grows into something beautiful and heartwarming and a healthy relationship. What more could you ask for from a romance book? I just thoroughly enjoyed it so much. I was on such a high after finishing that book for months on end. I really want to reread it this year just because I love it so much. But yeah, like that was my major selling point for it as well. And I finally got around to beach read earlier this year actually, and yeah, confirmed that Emily Henry is an auto-buy author for me. I know there's a lot of hype around this book, so if you're like me and kind of fearful of reading hype books, trust me, you will not go wrong with this book. It's such a good book. Please read it. For this next book, I would say it's definitely out of my comfort zone because it's sci-fi, but also romance. You will not catch me reading sci-fi. Sci-fi and I just don't vibe with each other like that. But I have heard so many good things about this book, so I said, you know, let me try it out. The audiobook was maybe 2 hours long. Super short read, but nevertheless packed such a punch. That book is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Mohtar. This book is just a mind bucket in itself. I wish I could experience it for the first time, honestly, all over again, because I did not know what was going on at any point in that book, but I was entertained nonetheless. And what else could you look for in a book? It's following these two spies on opposite sides of a time war, essentially, and they're both from different time periods, and they correspond with each other. So essentially the book is just following their correspondences as time goes on. And first of all, the creativity of these letters was just mind-blowing in itself, and then there would be details throughout the entire book that you don't realize come together until the very end. And for me, that's what sold me on this book, was how like these little tiny bits and pieces throughout the book finally merged together to make this big picture at the end, and just big major plot twist that of course I love. First of all, just the ingenuity and creativity of these letters itself alone. But also, I have a sweet spot when it comes to letters in books. I don't know why. Maybe it's the sentimentality in me, but I just adore it. Like, we see it in Chain of Gold. We see it in Stationery Shop. Just, yeah, I don't know. I just adore it so much. Definitely, hands down, the most unique read I read last year. And if you're looking for something quick, but packs a punch and keeps you entertained the entire time, and you just want to experience something brand new, which is also the intrigue with this book, that it's just completely unlike anything I've ever read in the best way. So if you're looking for something like that, definitely pick this book up. So this next book, I don't think any of us are surprised that it made it onto this list, especially if you know me and you've been around for long enough. But this next book was just perfect. No other word to describe it, honestly, and that's We Free the Stars by Hafsa Faizal. This is the sequel to We Hunt the Flame, and I love these characters so much, and it's just so good. I have been recommending this to anyone who will listen to me for the longest time, ever since We Hunt the Flame came out. I am sure everyone's aware of like the curse when it comes to sequels, that they just tend to not live up to the beauty and amazement of the first book. Typically, this is not always the case, as seen with Chain of Iron, but that's typically the case. And I tend to be very nervous, especially when it comes to duologies, because I feel as though duologies, you have to do them perfectly right for them to feel complete, because it can easily feel as though a series is left unfinished or it feels lackluster just because it has only 2 books, as opposed to either being a single solo book or a trilogy, which is typical in fantasy series. And I know I myself was very apprehensive because, again, this is such a much beloved series for me that I just was very nervous, to say the least. The stakes were so high for me to read this book. That's why it took me like a good 6 months to finally get around to it, but I finally did, and I did not regret it. That's, to this day, the best sequel I have ever read in my entire life. That book blew the first book out of the water for me. I'm still speechless. I cannot believe that she was able to manage that, but that's why she's the genius that she is. And I just love it. If you're looking for something with found families based in ancient Arabian veined fantasy, you cannot go wrong with this book. I can go on and on about how beautiful and amazing this book is, so please pick it up. Not to mention, I just love the way Hafsa writes. She's able to intertwine this language or way of writing that's very indicative of Arabic or even Farsi poetry back in the day, that's just very romantic, lyrical, mysterious, all at the same time. It's beautiful, and like easily hands down the best YA couple. I will say this, best YA couple of all time. Next up was also another highly recommended series for me to read, and again, because of the hype surrounding it, I was very apprehensive, but the 3rd book had just come out, so I kind of just marathoned them all within a week, and I do not regret it, and that's the Brown Sisters trilogy. That book series was so good. The prime example of cartoon characters on a book cover delivering the best romance. I have not been proven wrong yet. That was a trend I noticed last year, and it did me so well. That trilogy is so incredibly good. It features queer characters, it features plus-size characters, it features characters with disabilities. Just so incredibly good, so well diverse, and just anything you could ask for in a romance. Each book was a solid hit. I just adore those sisters so much. I was very sad when I finished that trilogy, but again, another case of a very hyped book or series, you could say, that I was very scared about, but the payoff was wonderful. I did not regret, and I just recommend it to anyone now. Now I'm like, I got over the hype, I read it, and it lived up to the hype, so now I can recommend it to anyone who wants to read it. So if you've been apprehensive to read that series, please do. The next one took me by complete surprise. I was very unsure if I was gonna like this, because again, it wasn't necessarily hyped. Actually, quite the opposite. I didn't know of many people who had read this, but again, I was looking for something to read to kind of recover from the last few books I had mentioned, and the audiobook was super short. Even as an ebook, it's super short. It's called A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Essentially, we're following the wives of Dracula, which is already sounds yummy, delicious, scrumptious, but it's so good. It's like a not necessarily thriller, more like supernatural kind of like in between, in a sense, and throw in romance in the mix, and it was just such a fun time. And another case of a book having such beautiful writing. And in my experience, beautiful writing doesn't always translate when you're listening to it as an audiobook. Again, that's just my personal experience, but somehow this book, maybe props to the audiobook narrator, but the beautiful writing translated through the audiobook, and it was such a fun and immersive experience. And also, I was stressed out the whole time, so if you tend to be stressed out easily by books, maybe don't read this book, but also do if you're looking for a thrill, because I was not bored for any part of that book. It was very high stakes, but also do be warned, it does deal with physical and domestic abuse. Be sure to check trigger warnings for this book because there are quite a few, so do be warned of that before going in. But again, it's a very exciting reading experience. Definitely not a bored moment at all throughout the book. The ending was very satisfying. If I were to like give a quick short synopsis, girl power. Yes, following badass women that are kicking ass. Yes, so good. Highly recommend, especially if you're looking for something for spooky season. Definitely put this on your list. It was such a good time, so much fun, and the tea was piping in this one throughout the entire book. So yes, for this next book, if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, you will have heard me yelling about this book for quite some time. So this book is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Again, cartoon characters on a cover of a romance book strikes again. It was such a good time. Just to tell you how much I love this book, I could not stop thinking about it and ended up reading it again within like a week. So if that doesn't tell you something, then I don't know what will. It was such a good time. Great romance, great character development, and just overall had everything you could ask for from a romance. I loved it so much. As the popular girl, small town guy trope, and I guess you could say it's enemies to lovers in a sense, but so good. Such a good time. I know I keep saying it's so good, but of course we're talking about my favorite books of last year. The fact that I read it twice within a week. I think that's all I need to tell you about that book. This next book, also my brand, and that's The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. Again, if you follow me on Instagram or Twitter, this is another book that I'm like gently persuading people to read this book, and I have had a 100% success rate in recommending this book. Everyone that has listened to me recommend this book, they have told me that they could not stop reading it. They finished it in one day, in one sitting, which is very accurate, I would say. This has the fake dating trope set in an academic setting. I ate it up. Oh my gosh. I was like, well, because it's like a sciencey STEM romance, which honestly I have not seen a lot of. I did read The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren, but this book hit different, and it was such a fun time. Serotonin rush the entire time. Fake dating excellency, and just reading about two scientists fall in love. I said, you know, maybe there's hope for me yet, for me to find my Dr. Adam Carlson one day. But it was such a fun time. It's not very often that I see STEM-based romances again, and I just love that that's what she's focusing on. I know she has 3 short stories coming out this year, as well as a new book, Love on the Brain, which is in the universe of The Love Hypothesis, but it doesn't follow our 2 main leads of The Love Hypothesis. But regardless, I will read anything that she puts out. I genuinely believe that Emily Henry and Ali Hazelwood were put on this earth to write romances for me. I said what I said. I think last year was my year of overcoming my fear of hyped books. Or starting to. It's still very much present, but attempting to overcome that fear. This book I have been trying to read since it came out. Like, it's been sitting on my shelf ever since release, and I just never got around to reading it because, you know, there's some books where the vibes just have to be right. The mood has to be right, the time has to be right to read a book. Maybe that's just me being a perfectionist, I don't know, but that's how this book was for me, and I finally got around to it, and that was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This book was either make it or break it for me as a Leigh Bardugo stan, because I've heard so many mixed reviews about this book. Again, not only was it overhyped, but I also heard a lot of mixed reviews. It's either you love it or you hate it, and that's very polarizing and very terrifying for me to hear. So I went into it cautiously optimistic, and it's basically a dark academia, magical realism, urban fantasy book, which in itself is very different from what she's usually known for in terms of her books. And additionally, it's her first adult book, which again is completely new to her and also to me as well, in the sense of reading an adult book written by her. I again had high hopes in the sense that I already adore anything that she comes out with, so I was hoping that was the case for this book, and it definitely was the case with this book, and I was very, very relieved and happy to learn about this and find this out upon finishing it. That was just such a fun experience and very different from her other books, which again, if you're not familiar with her other books, maybe that would give you like a blank slate sort of to jump into. I was very happy with the execution of that book, and I have been in a hunt for a good dark academia book, and I guess people are on the fence as to whether that does count as dark academia. In my book, it does count as dark academia. Hello, we're talking about Yale University and secret societies and dark magic. That's dark academia to me. I thoroughly enjoyed it so much, and I love how while reading it you can tell that it is her writing. Her writing style is still very distinct throughout, and I find that that's just a very admirable trait to have as a writer, that your writing style is still very evident despite it being a completely different book from what you've written before. The fact that that's still present, I think, just speaks to her expertise when it comes to this craft of writing, and I just admire that so much about her, and I could only hope that I could write that way one day. I just thought that that was just a stroke of genius from her, the fact that she could uphold that despite writing a completely different genre and age range. And also I love that there's just a essence to the whole book that's very indicative for me personally, how I feel about New England, and I just love that that feeling I love so much about the New England is very prevalent and very prominent throughout the book. I can't pinpoint it exactly for you. It's just, you just have to read it to find out. It was such an incredible book. I can't stop thinking about it ever since I read it. I want to reread it soon because I really cannot wait for the sequel to come out. I need news for that sequel yesterday, but it was a big surprise in the best way, and I'm just very glad that it lived up to my expectations and even far beyond what I was hoping this book would provide and offer. But also, again, please check trigger warnings for this book. I was very caught off guard by some things and so I probably should have checked it, but yes, please check trigger warnings for this book before going in. It just confirmed that Leigh Bardugo is also an auto-buy author for me. Again, because it was so polarizing from what I'd heard, because it's her new adult book, I wasn't sure, so I said, okay, if there's any book that's going to confirm this for me, it would be this book, and it confirmed it. Leigh Bardugo, auto-buy author, confirmed, and I'm just in good hands when it comes to her books. I know she will do me good. Hey guys, editing Samira here. The final book on this list was also a surprise as well to me, and that was a historical fiction / romance set in past and present Iran during and after the revolution that occurred. And this was both heartwarming and so heart-wrenching. It just impacted me so much. I just can't recommend it enough to people, and it's very near and dear to my heart, and that's Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. And essentially we're following our main character who's living right before the revolution that occurred in Iran, and she loves to frequent this bookshop or this stationery shop, and with every visit she essentially befriends the shop owner, and by befriending the shop owner he basically sets her up with this guy who also loves going to this bookshop a lot. So it's like this romance that starts brewing within a bookshop, which that's everyone's dream. We end up having this beautiful budding young romance between these two characters, and all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, the revolution starts. These two characters get separated for 60 years, I believe. Split POV between past and present, like I said, from the main character. However, we get letters throughout the book that's from the love interest, and they never get sent to her. I'm telling you, I'm just if that's not angsty enough, I don't know what is. This book is just so near and dear to my heart. It's so well written, and it's just so beautiful, and the way it's written, similar but also slightly different from how I mentioned with We Free the Stars, that the writing is so lyrical and so poetic and so dramatic as well. The love in this book, the romance in this book is so angsty and deep that it's so indicative of ancient Persian poetry. I love this book so much, and if you are looking for a new historical romance slash fiction, I cannot recommend this enough to you. And I know this is being adapted into either a movie or a show, not sure, but yeah, I just adore that book so much, and I hope you pick it up. But that is all I have for you today. I just, again, wanted to sit down and just talk about my favorite books of last year, because again, I did read the most I've ever read in my entire life. Will I hit that goal again? Most likely not, but I did set my Goodreads goal for, I think, 40 books this year. If you don't follow me on Goodreads, definitely follow me so we can be friends and I can snoop what everyone's reading. But we will see if I can hopefully hit my goal this year. Definitely not 100. I think that was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I hope you decide to pick these books up. I hope I did them justice in convincing you to read any of these. If you do decide to read them, let me know. If you did already read these books last year, please let me know what you thought, because I just love talking to people about these books. And also what made it onto your favorites of last year, if I haven't already mentioned them, because I am always looking for new books to read. Hopefully it won't be too long until my next upload, but until then, I will see you later. Bye!